Hi everyone, here's a 16 by 20 acrylic painting on canvas I recently finished, and you can see the whole process here from start to finish. Everything is 20 times faster than I actually painted. And as you can see, I just start with a process that's called killing the canvas, which is actually just getting down some foundation color so that you don't have a blank canvas to work on. And I simultaneously do what's called blocking in the major forms. I use something close to the final color, and I just pick large areas that I'm going to need to cover to find where everything goes. Where does the ocean stop and the sky begin? Where's the placement of the sun in each particular cloud shape? And as I go, I just keep refining. The way I like to describe the process is very similar to aiming a camera at something out of focus. And you just slowly bring the camera in focus. And the benefit to this is you get to slowly adapt and perfect the size, shape, placement, texture, and color of everything as it relates to everything else all at the same time. You can just move around and adjust everything as it all comes together. It's a much more loose and free-form way of painting than doing a very detailed guide drawing first. And in this case, I've never been to Tahiti, so I just did an image search on the internet, and I actually combined about 5 different images to create the final image. And so the sky is made out of, I think, 3 different skies that I mixed together. And then the structure on the right there, that's from one photo. The foreground kind of beachy ground area is from another. The catamaran is from another. And the palm trees you're going to be seeing appear relatively soon. Those are from, I think, 2 other photos. So as you can see, once everything is blocked in, it's just a matter of continuing to refine all of the form, getting all of the shapes more and more detailed and more specific. And just one thing that's really dangerous with acrylic paints that you'll hear all of the time as a complaint is that they look too flat like house paint. And the trick is, unlike oil paints, which naturally, because they stay wet so long, and because of their sort of mineral base, they tend to look very rich, and there's a lot of mixed variance to the colors, whereas acrylic, they lay down very flat and they dry very fast, which does not lend to a lot of sort of inadvertent blends and other additional color in your painting. So you have to work harder in that regard. So that's another reason I use this process where I just keep layering on thin layers of color, and even the opaque acrylics are a little bit translucent. They let some of the color beneath show through. So the more layers of similar color that you work one on top of the other, the more you'll get a much richer final image than if you just do one color and slap it on. Like if you do a really detailed drawing, that would be a risk because you know exactly where everything goes. If you get exactly the right color in exactly the right place from the get-go, you won't have that need to do the layering, and your final painting, while very accurate in its placement and color, might be missing that sort of accidental richness that comes from working in layers and working a little more freehand and being able to adapt as you go. And though I plan for much of this painting to be in silhouette for that specific visual effect, it's important that I work in enough very dark but still existing detail into the parts of the painting that are going to be pretty much silhouetted. And then I can always use what's called a wash, or in oil painting terminology, a glaze, over those details to darken it and sort of unify it again so that those details fall deeper into that single silhouette effect. But if you look closely, you can still see that there's some level of detail in there. It's not just a pure single colored like black, or in this case Payne's gray shape. And in general, it's a good idea to use Payne's gray most of the time instead of pure black, because it's got an inherent richness. It's made from a combination of a very dark rich blue and a very dark rich brown color. And usually in nature you're not going to see something that is truly pure pitch black. It's going to be reflecting or refracting some other colors, either from the sky or bouncing off of the nearby objects and ground. And another thing worth pointing out to people that are painters themselves, especially beginner painters or people that want to get into painting and are trying to choose a color palette of colors to work with, for paintings like this with extremely vivid purples and magentas, you might think, oh, I can just mix a nice strong blue and a nice strong red together to get the colors I need, but you'll find that they are far too dull and grayed out or brownish when you try to do that. So if you want to do extremely vivid sunset style paintings or just colors in general that have extremely vivid purples, you're going to have to extend your color palette to include at least a couple of different strong magenta and violet colors. And as you can see, in general, when doing landscape style paintings, or just in general any kind of image that has a lot of very specific sort of layers of depth, like a really far distant sky, and then clouds, and then background hills or mountains, and then something closer up, and so on, I tend to work for the most part from the distance to the foreground. In other words, I make sure the sky is very near finished before I start working on the things that go over top of it. And that's just a good idea in general, because you don't want to have to try to paint your clouds while dodging the mountains that you already painted down, or trying very carefully to go up to the very edge. And you'll see at the edge of that sort of hut structure there, I've gone into it with little wave details and parts of the sunset, and I'm going to have to repaint that edge to clean it back up later on. So it's a good idea to make sure, if you have your back layers pretty much done, then you can freely paint the stuff on top of it without worrying. And now you're not going back into your sky for the most part, so you don't have to go in and waste a lot of time carefully avoiding things, which is not only going to take a lot more time, but almost inevitably you're going to end up with an inferior image, because there's going to be this obvious area one way or the other where there's less paint, because you were being so careful to not overlap where the things overlap. So it's just a good idea. As you can see, I'm working in, I'm cleaning up the edge of the hut where I needed to, and started painting in the mid-ground palm trees, and the same thing, the biggest palm trees in the foreground will be pretty much the last things that I paint in. And then after that point, it's just going to be a lot of noodling around, finalizing the exact shape and adding final details, and then final glazes to just knock things back or adjust something's color. You'll see later on in the painting process where I have these very purple colors in the sort of lit window areas, or at least open window frame areas, and I just give them a wash or a glaze of a very watered down yellow paint in order to tint it to make it a little bit more warm and toward the oranges, instead of just a very pink and purple range of color. So that's another way you can get a lot more richness in your acrylic paintings. Once everything is mostly established, you can do these tinting glazes of mostly water with a little bit of color to make adjustments to the hue, which is basically the chroma. What kind of color is it? A little more toward yellows or blues or orange? You can mix up a color and then lay it on in a mix of mostly water and a little bit of paint, and then brush it on, and it won't cover what it's already there. It'll just change the tint of it, or in some cases darken it if that's what you want to do. And I do that at some point with most of the silhouetted area in the ground, and a little bit in the hut area. As you can see, I've been working in the major form first of the foreground palm trees, and first I sort of did a skeletal approach where I created a thin line to give myself a guide for the trunk. Then I made that closer to the final thickness, and then I drew these branches, just basically these curved sticks, to give myself a wireframe on which I would then build the full shape of each of these large branch structures. And as you can see also, I used a larger angled brush to fill in the large areas of mass that did not have any of the negative space in it, where you couldn't see the individual lines of these leaf structures. And then I could more quickly build and extend those outward with the final details. It just saved me a lot of time working that way. And it's just going to take me a bit longer to do that, and unfortunately it took longer than I would have liked it to, because I discovered that while high quality and very permanent in its pigment, they didn't use a lot of pigment in the mix. So I actually had to go back over twice, and then sometimes 3 times, to get the full solid opacity that I wanted for this silhouette effect. And so that really slowed it down. You can see I'm going back over a lot of the same thing twice, and this is obviously hundreds of little leaf type structures coming out of these branches, so it slowed down the process quite a bit. So it really is important to learn which brands provide you the when a color is supposed to be opaque, it's really important that they include a very large amount of pigment, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time doubling over your initial brush strokes yet again, just to make them truly opaque, which is especially dangerous in the cases of fine details like this, because when you have to go back over a paint stroke, you're inevitably going to make that paint stroke a little bit thicker and change its shape a little. So it's really good to know and stick with the right brands if you can. But in a pinch, I was at a fine art store. I needed the color. They didn't have the brand that I knew I could rely on, so I just got another high quality brand with a strong light fastness or pigment permanence rating, but I had never used it before, and it turned out that it just wasn't as opaque as the brand that I tend to go with. So as you can see, I'm breaking my own rule here to some extent. Once you're pretty much done with the painting, it's really important to keep standing back far away from the painting, sort of squinting at it, examine it, and just really double check, make sure everything's to your liking. It's really good if you can afford the time to do so. Put the painting away for a few days and don't look at it at all, and come back with a fresh eye so you can really decide what final touches you need to put on it. In fact, at first I wasn't thinking I would want or need a reflection at all of that mid island area with the palm trees, but after coming back with a fairly fresh eye, I realized it just looked a little too artificial and flat without that reflection in there. And and as you can see, like I said, I'm working in finer details now on background stuff, even though the foreground is in there. Sometimes it's necessary, after taking a look, taking a step back, once it's mostly done, it's time to really decide what final finishing details and touches and changes can I make to just make it a more attractive or compelling image. And so that's what I'm doing here. I added some rim light. And so here we are with the finished painting. And I hope the process was informative and entertaining. And thank you very much for watching. If you do like this or any of my other paintings, please visit my page on fineartamerica.com. where you can purchase anything from beautifully framed museum-quality prints of my paintings to throw pillows, cell phone cases, and even shower curtains of my art. Or share this video with your friends if you think they might also enjoy watching. Your support is greatly appreciated and will allow me to make more art and videos more frequently. And thanks very much for watching.